So, without further delay, we might just kick off. Thanks everyone for joining us. Welcome to our Brood for Success employer branding tips session. I'm Dave from Checkmate, so I'll be your host for today. Before we get started, I'd just like to do or acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. This webinar is the first of our four-part series. We call it the Brood for Success series. And it's really designed to give you some practical, punchy takeaway tips around employer branding while you chug on your morning coffee. So hopefully you've got your coffee and your Tim Tams ready. Really, whether you're looking to attract stronger candidates, retain the ones you have, or keep your best ones longer, or simply stand out in a crowded market, this is the right webinar for you. So each session will bring a slightly different angle, but we're all focused on one big idea, and that is how to build a brand people genuinely want to work for. A couple of things, a little bit of housekeeping. The toilet is still where it is in your home, so you know where that is. This session is being recorded, so please make sure you're smiling, minimize sleep time, and we'd love for this to be as interactive as possible. So please get involved, ask questions, share thoughts, and just connect with each other. If we could get that happening, it would be great success. To kick things off, while I'm just finishing this intro, if you could drop into the chat what you're hoping to get out of today's session, and we'll try to accommodate that. That'd be fantastic. As I said, today's session is all about employer branding, the key to attracting and retaining top talent. And an amazing stat that we promoted earlier this week was that 92% of people say they'd consider switching jobs if a company with a stronger reputation came along. So that's a pretty astounding number. Huge challenge for some and a huge opportunity for those that have a really strong brand. And to help us explore exactly how to become that brand, I'm delighted to introduce today's guest, and that's Keela Savelli. Keela is the Senior Talent Brand and Social Inclusion Manager at V-Line. She's a bit of a trailblazer in employer branding and inclusive talent strategy. She's built some award-winning programs that connect people with really meaningful work. And originally from New York, she now lives in Melbourne. Keela has led high-impact teams across iconic Australian brands such as Australia Post, RMIT, Sportsbet, and now at V-Line, where she's helping shape a workforce that reflects the communities it serves. Quick fact about Keela, she's a proud mum of 3 under 6, so she's busy getting shit done. She knows a thing or two about time management, multitasking, and keeping it real. So enough from me, let's dive in. Over to you, Keela.
I was just going to say, I don't need to go through this slide because you've just captured all of me in just a few sentences. So thank you for that. I will say that I'm not great at the time management, but that's why on brand for this topic of a brood session, I drink a lot of coffee and my order of choice is an almond latte because real milk hurts my tummy, gives me a little bit of heartburn. So I'm an almond latte girl. Thank you to everyone that's joining and people that will be listening to this recording. Like Dave said, I've not just led the teams, but I grew the teams at Australia Post, RMIT, Sportsbet, and now V-Line. So I know a thing or two about employer brands and what gets strategy over the line. So that's what we'll be talking about today. I initially, when I was asked to speak, I went into Copilot. That's what we use at work instead of ChatGPT. And I typed in why is employer brand important? And then it just came up with really boring content that we already know. And I thought that's not going to be compelling. Then I said, give me a compelling reason why employer brand is required in an organization. And again, it was very blasé, boring content. So I thought, why don't you actually use the word that you're looking to use? And I wrote, give me a provocative reason to have an employer brand function, something to actually shake things up. And the fire emoji actually came up in their response. So I thought that's a good sign. And the response was, because if you don't define your employer brand, someone else will, probably on Glassdoor. And it's not groundbreaking information. We all know this, but it needs to be said. And anyone that knows me knows that I'm very annoying and perpetually positive when it comes to employer brand. But I think in our roles today, that can only get you so far. And I really want to flip the conversation instead of thinking like it's an opportunity to have an employer brand function. They're lucky to have us. Of course, we won't be made redundant. Or of course, we're going to get a bunch of yeses to the strategy that we present. That's simply not the case. The organizations that I've worked at, the last few, have had a very heavy risk mindset. And that's taught me that you can't just think about the opportunities of having employer brand. You need to think about the risk of not having an employer brand. So that's what I wanted to discuss today. When you think about the risk, there's really three key things that I wanted us to jump into. So the risk of not having an employer brand is that now candidates search for roles just like consumers search for products. They Google you, they go to LinkedIn, they go to Seek, they go to Work 180 to get that like really rich information. They do their research often before even applying and definitely before coming in for their interview. This again is not new information, but it's something that's really critical. A lot of our community and employer brand come from a talent background. They don't come from a marketing background. And we're no strangers to thinking about segments in terms of role type and departments that we're building employer value propositions for or employer brand. But it's also sometimes really hard for us in our community to think of the job as the product. They're coming through the employment funnel to purchase a product, which is a job at the end of the day. And if we flip our mindset to think about the consumer risk or the risk of them going to consume a product somewhere else, I think that mindset really helps. The second one is all about reputation. So if you've been an employer, brand is the key word here, and reputation is what fuels it. Reputation is no longer optional. A single viral post can damage the talent pipeline and even your share price. And we'll talk about that in a few moments of a real life example of how things just went horribly wrong from a simple speech at a Christmas party. And I think everyone knows what I'll be talking about. And then I'm just going to minimize this so I can see the third slide. So the third one is that employer brand is risk management. If you don't have a proactive defense against misinformation, disengagement, and irrelevance, then you're feeding a brand funnel that is only hurting your company and hurting your talent pipeline. And I'll again give a real life, actually a few examples of how the organizations that I've worked at have really thought about this third point about risk management. Again, use the chat function. I'm from New York, so if you don't stop me and interrupt me, I will just keep talking. And I'm like very happy to do that. So please just stop me. All right, so I'm going to give you a few examples from the real world to just bring this to life. So last December, we saw an agency, I believe in Melbourne, somebody posted a video from the meeting before the Christmas party from their CEO. And he, in jest, mentioned, don't sleep with anyone at a Christmas party and don't get into provocative behavior. Somebody filmed it, and out of context, that went viral. And needless to say, they had to go into major damage control. What this does is it takes away from all of the good work that they might have done before, their brand capacity. I'm sure that they lost many clients to it because of the risk of associating their brand with this agency, or maybe they didn't, but they had the question about whether or not they were going to lose market share. I'm not telling you not to have provocative content. I'm talking about making sure that your content does think about the risk and analyzes what the flavor of the market is, what the market is actually willing to handle. So that's just one example. And of course, I haven't worked there, so that's just me as a consumer of media seeing that damage control that had to happen. And of course, like a few months later, they started to emerge. We thought maybe they would change names of their brand, that they would change their leadership structure and potentially their board. And I believe that a lot of that was in conversation or might have even happened. Now, the companies that I have worked at, first was Australia Post. So I started working there close to about 10 years ago and started their employer brand functionality. Now, when you close your eyes and you think of Australia Post, you probably think about your postie that delivers your mail. You probably think, oh, it's like a government agency. It's a must-have in every community, but you probably think it's like cardigans and very strict and a lot of red tape. I beg you to go onto their LinkedIn now and go onto their TikTok. If 10 years ago me knew that they would be on TikTok now, I wouldn't have believed you. And
Mm.
they've done so much work. They're ahead of the curve. I just saw a video that they put up yesterday. They were doing like a mock Met Gala. And again, like 10 years ago, me never would have thought that Australia Post could be that provocative and be that on the ball and that timely with their content. But the risk is that people do close their eyes and they think of Australia Post as one thing. So you've got to push the envelope and try and get people to realize that it's so much more. And with each generation of employer brand teams that kind of come through there, they're progressing really well and they build the trust in the organization to be able to create content like that. Just to tie it back to the theme of risk, like I mentioned, the risk is what people think Australia Post is versus what it actually is. So building that content to showcase what it really is critical. Now, sports bet, 3 of the best years of my career, but the most polarizing organization that I've ever worked for. Now, I always say the conversation isn't whether or not you love or hate gambling right now. For right now, it's for me to show you really a case study of what it's like to work there. So we made a decision as a talent team years ago that we weren't going to change people's values. If people do not believe in gambling and they do not want to work in gambling, our job was not to convince them because values run deeper than employment. Our job was to find people that were maybe sitting on the fence, which was probably where I was sitting, didn't love or hate it, just didn't really know enough about gambling, or people that love it. There are a lot of people that go to the races with their uncles and their dads growing up, or they come from a sporting family and this is their dream job. But then there are a lot of people that do need that convincing and that education. The risk of only attracting that one bucket, the people that dream about working at Sportsbet when they grow up, is that you get a lot of the same kinds of people with the same skill set, the same desires, and potentially the same demographics. But if you start to educate the talent market on what it's really like to work here, what the benefits are, what the work is like, what the technology is that supports the app and our customers, and some of the other perks about working there, and also the DE&I initiatives as well, I should say, you start to actually change the conversation. And the risk is mitigated because you get to expand the types of people that work there. And then the last thing, the North Face fleece. Anyone that lived in Melbourne during COVID probably get shudders when they see this fleece coming because they know that it's probably bad news about a lockdown. I like to, while I've only worked at V-Line now for about 6.5 months. I do always think about working in a government organization or working in public sector where people think it's the North Face fleece, it's delivering bad news, or it's a must-have, not a nice-to-have. And I mean that in a negative way. It's a government agency, that kind of thing. And you think you know about what kinds of things go on here. I'm so happy to report that it is the complete opposite. It's progressive, it's diverse, it's a rainbow of human beings that work here with a rainbow of different skill sets that are really delivering this beautiful community offering to our regional customers. For anyone that doesn't know, V-Line is our regional train, the purple train in Victoria, with increasing patronage, increasing innovation, and it's a really incredible place to work. But the risk again is that if somebody in talent brand or employer brand weren't here to be able to start ruffling the feathers and getting our people's stories out there and telling the compelling reasons about why it's so great to work here, developing the EVPs, then the risk is that everyone thinks that it's a guy in North Face delivering bad news. They think it's just another public sector company, it's just another government agency, but it's so much more. So I'm going to take a break there and I'm going to ask 2 questions to get the conversation potentially flowing. But think about your own organization. What's the risk to your organization if you don't have an employer brand capability or the sharing capability? And then the second question is, what can you do about it? I know some of you have mentioned that you have an employer brand role or that you're thinking about having an employer brand role in your organization. But if you think about EB as a risk function, maybe we can open the floor to some conversation if you feel comfortable.
I'll lead out for you. There you go. I think for us as a head of sales, the risk to our organization is because we're such a small business, is that we can't access the top talent that we need to be able to scale. And so employer brand definitely is important to us, and how we do that. There's a couple of things that you mentioned that we don't really talk about because there's so many things we can talk about. DE and I, we probably don't talk about that enough, but we're diverse from different backgrounds, different genders, the whole gamut, even though we're a small company, and we probably don't promote that enough. But yeah, I think that's a really big challenge for us to, we're competing against billion-dollar businesses. So we need billion-dollar staff, if you like, for sure.
Yeah, I think there's such a beautiful way that talent brand or employer brand can uplift DE&I initiatives, and that's through the storytelling. Through the EVP research that I've been doing here, I met with somebody who moved here 10 years ago on refugee status, went to a job fair, was an engineer where he came from, and went to a job fair and heard about our organization and has been working here ever since and has climbed the ladder and is really successful here. And you just think like somebody who's come from refugee status has had such a tough time and is now thriving in Australia. If somebody else sees that and reads that compelling information or watches a video with him speaking, they can identify with that and see that story of hope and see that like my organization is who really lifted him up in a time of
Mm.
need. So yeah, there's so many stories that you can tell.
Yeah, I think if you don't see it, you don't aspire to it. It's at least not en masse.
Yeah,
So you can see that
exactly.
even as a side analogy with women's sport. As women's sport is getting stronger and stronger, more women are playing sport. I've got four daughters and they all play sport. Yep, I've got one, two more than you actually, Killer. But yeah, yeah, okay, good point. Anyone else want to share where a threat might be to them or where the risk is to them?
Yeah, I can share. I think totally agree with you, Dave. Like, completely agree that, especially when it comes to attracting top talent, I think that if you don't have an employer brand capability, there's so many companies out there at the moment. The market's so crowded. And by not having that, you're just like one in a million. So
Mm,
that really helps, I think, just have that unique messaging, have that unique pull as to why people should pick your company out of all of these companies out there and really help you attract top talent. And then I think on the flip side, if I'm thinking back to a company like Wise, the risk of not having an employer brand was it was such a big company. I think now it's probably about 5,000 people, and they probably could almost run the risk of having sometimes a bit of a damaged employer brand by not having something to guide them. There would be Glassdoor reviews, they wouldn't always be positive. There would be feedback from interviews, stuff like that. So having a strong employer brand not only protects like risk in that sense, but also helps guide people towards a bit of a compass as to why they loved working there as well, I think, as well, and really ground them to the values.
I agree. I think that I'm very much in an EVP mindset right now, employer value proposition, and doing those interviews. But when you hand somebody the microphone and you ask them questions about their experience, it reminds them why they love working here or why the redemption stories. Like it wasn't great at one point. This awesome thing happened and I'm staying now. Like I'm here. And you like
Mm.
really build engagement by having these one-on-one conversations or focus groups, however you end up doing it. But you're absolutely right by mitigating that risk, having the conversations and then giving them that compass externally. This is what really goes on, and this is why people enjoy it, and being really honest with the market. It's great.
because you've got an employer brand regardless of whether you're managing it well, right?
Yeah.
It, people have an opinion of you. You might as well try and make it a good one.
Yeah, exactly. Or people have an idea of what it's like to be your consumer, and they assume that it's the same experience as an employer, and it's not.
Mm,
Way
yeah.
rather. Great.
Can I ask another question? It's not off, it's just off here. Is that okay? Or am I going
Yeah.
out? Yeah, cool.
No, please do. I'll do one of
Just
these. There you go.
just going
Q&A.
back, you mentioned like a lot of employer brand specialists or people that are focused on that. If you're a small business, you might have a dual role, but if you're focused on that, you mentioned a lot come from talent or recruitment because obviously it's the employer brand and maybe not from marketing. How do you get over that if I'm responsible for employer brand and I'm from talent? So I have an idea. What's ways I can get around that?
A soft skill that I love to hire for is somebody who's a connector. So I'm actually going to be opening a role on my team, I believe on Friday or Monday. And when I'm recruiting actively for a talent brand specialist, I'm looking for somebody not necessarily that comes from marketing, not necessarily somebody who comes from talent, but somebody that can connect with the right people in an organization and can give me examples of when they came in and somebody thought that they were this, but because they were able to connect with somebody in marketing, internal comms, and this, they were able to deliver on this exceptional project or be a part of something exceptional. And I think that's key because I came from marketing. So I've got like my idea of, I know segmentation. I can understand like the digital map of how things are meant to flow. And that's the skill set that I bring. But somebody in talent, like they really understand the talent audience. They understand their market and they have a whole other half to the puzzle that I had to learn. I had to like really learn that. I always joke around that when Rebecca Houghton from Australia Post, she was my boss's boss, tapped me on the shoulder to do this project. I was like, who's this scary HR lady asking me in marketing, like this cool 25-year-old to come work in HR? You got it. That's so different than what I thought it was. And yeah, but then you go and you learn and you have to stay humble and learn the whole HR world. So there's value to both. But the one thing that I love searching for is somebody who's a connector.
Yeah. So don't be afraid to go and engage marketing skills to help you on your EV program. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And another question I have is probably two parts actually. How do you where do you start? What's the starting point? Let's say I've just come in and I'm a small to medium-sized business. I'm not V-Line that has a dedicated employer brand specialist. Where do I pick up? What's a way that I would suggest? And the second part of that question would be, how do you measure success?
Good question that I don't know that anyone knows the answer to all the time, but where do you start? I think it's really important to deal in fact. And you deal in fact when you do the research, employer value proposition, and that is equal parts to surveying or having one-on-one chats with at least 10% of your organization to make it statistically relevant data. And then also the desktop research. What are people saying external to your company? So that's your Glassdoor, your Seek, your Indeed type reviews. And then doing an audit of your career site, social channels where people might be commenting on the experience. And you got a lot in bigger brands. Like when I worked at Australia Post, we knew that people were commenting on our Facebook page, not just about what it's like to be a consumer, but also what it's like to be a candidate.
Yeah.
So you do those audits. So it's your EVP, your desktop research on what people are saying on the review sites, as well as what people are saying on social media. And that helps you really build the substance of what you're solving for and what you want the messaging to be going at to the market. So that's where I always say to start. And then measuring, it depends. Like you've got your short-term, midterm, and long-term goals of what you want to measure. And ideally, it's not just about the volume that you're bringing in and bringing in more people. It's actually about bringing fewer people into the funnel that are actually right for the job. The way that you measure whether or not they're right for the job, that could be a whole other series.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I'm sure it's about their performance and whether you mark that at 6 months or a year. We could talk about it for like literally hours. So good
Yeah,
one,
we should.
Dee. Great one, Dee.
We'll talk to LJ later. That's a whole
Yeah,
nother
invite me
series.
back.
Absolutely. Any other questions from the team? Steph?
Yes, I have a question. So I think when I first moved to Australia and started at Talent, the challenges were really different from what I'd experienced at Wise. What would you say is critical to build a standout employee brand for a startup, really trying to build presence up in a crowded market? And on the flip side, how do you rebuild your reputation for a damaged employer brand?
Great questions. I think consistency is key. And if I put like my marketing hat on, there are a lot of people that want to fix an issue, but no one has ever heard of them before in the market. Ooh, I think the lights just went off in my room. So I'm just doing one of these. It's about consistency in the market. So it's not just like putting up a post once a month and hoping that the talent market remembers you from the month prior. It's 2 to 3 times a week. It's consistently having your messaging about your EVP, building that content funnel that is meaningful. It's all about significant dates in the calendar. So you know that you've got like International Women's Day coming up as an example. So you start telling the stories of your women that are working in your organization or talent that have worked with you. It's really about mapping that out for the whole year. And that's also a risk mitigation tool. Like I said, if you're consistent, when you do have to mitigate risk, people have something to fall back on, the brand that you've built over that period of time. Did that
Yeah,
answer?
completely agree. I think, yeah, no, that does. I think it's critical keeping the momentum going, like building up the posts and just keep like getting in front of people and sharing your messaging. Can I ask one more question if that's okay?
Yeah.
Of course.
I feel like I'm seeing more and more that there's been like more of a spike in a trend of sharing vulnerability. So I can't speak about, yeah, our organization. I think the trend used to be like, we're so perfect, join us. This is why we're great. But now I'm seeing more like, actually, we're not perfect. Like, these are the challenges. It might not be for everyone. Do you feel as though you're seeing that trend more and more as well? And do you feel like it's important to share what's not perfect about your organization?
Yeah, I think as long as I've been in talent, the mindset has been be honest in the job ads. So we're not great at this for this role, but that's why we need you to come in with this skill set to help us take us from point A to point B. And the ideal candidate will help us get to be on this journey. So I think that's a really basic talent example. But what I've seen, which also gets a lot of criticism on LinkedIn, is like, LinkedIn is not Facebook. Why are you telling us stories of your family life or posting pictures of you on your vacation or telling us like really vulnerable stories about your health and well-being? But the truth is like we're whole human beings. And if I work at a place that really honors me for who I am 100%, then that content isn't an issue. And that showcases a lot about the brand that you serve and your own professional brand and the actual employer that you work for, if they're willing to support you in that conversation. I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, completely agree. No, I think it also
I,
shows that your brand is human. Like, it's got real people, it's authentic, and it's got empathy, which is a
yep,
huge pull as well. So no, completely agree.
yeah,
I
and I have been
saw
doing a lot of that content. Sorry, David,
there's
go ahead.
no just to your point there, Steph, there's a utility in Queensland called Unity Water. They're responsible for water and sewage and stuff like that. And their employer campaign at the moment is it's a pretty good job. So it's not like it's an awesome job. It's not, hey, this is
Oh,
easy
look
or
into
anything.
that.
It's just like it's a pretty good job. And it's on every single
Mm.
ad. It's a really cool
Oh,
way
nice.
of just calling it out. It's just, hey, it's a pretty good job.
And it's in
Like,
their tone of voice too. If you talk to somebody who's on the tools there, they'd be like, yeah, it's a pretty good job.
yeah.
It's the way they talk in
Oh,
tone
that's
of.
cool.
But it sounds, hey, but it by default, there's flaws in it, but it's pretty good.
Mm.
And I think that's a pretty honest little slogan they've got running. But yeah, cool. Any other questions from anybody else? Just conscious of time, and if someone really is running to their coffee heartbeat, they might need to get another coffee. Keela, there was one thing that you wanted everyone to take away today. What would that be?
Yeah, it's just that we can't afford to think that we are the best thing that ever happened to an organization. We have to go in with a risk mindset. And I've seen that trend over the last 5 years, where companies are looking to mitigate risk by having employer brands and not necessarily be the cheerleader, but be the risk mitigator. You can be both. I love being a cheerleader, but you have to have that
Yeah.
risk mindset to be successful.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And I'm sure that gets cut through with the executives as well, right?
Yeah.
They're always about risk. Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Kilas, so much for both your slides and your presentation. That was fantastic. I've written a page of notes and got some good things to think about for the team. So really appreciate your time today and everyone for joining us. If you have time, we're going to run this, as I said, for the next 4 weeks or 3 more weeks after this. 10:30 each Thursday, we'll be grabbing our coffee and sitting down with another expert to hear about employer brand. Thanks very much, guys. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much, Deb and Keela.
Bye-bye.
Bye.